Framework, day one. Log entry is dated May 1st of 2005. I got the frame pretty well cleaned and with a wire brush on a sidewinder. The lift winch came in handy with the lifting of the frame and wheeling it outside to clean this thing up. The frame is so light I can manhandle it, but I needed an excuse to use the lift. It looked neat and really made moving things around a breeze, so I will use it more and more. I cut the rotted rear tail off. If you look at the pictures that I've got shown close enough, you might see some tack welds where I put the X-brace connections to the side members. These should be accurate, as I mocked up the open side to the other side that was still locked together with a rivet. I knew that the rivet connections was going to be lost with the cut, so I made sure to lock the open side with the weld before cutting back the frame, and it sat with respect to the area where the X member ties back into the side member. It's 5 inches higher at the very tail. This became my reference for mocking up one of Scott's X member pieces for the connection back to the rear build of the car and rear tail of the section of the frame. I cut slits on the bend of the channels to tuck about 8 inches of the tail back up into the X member pieces still on the frame. I measured from the front of the frame to the end of it with Scott's tail. It was 157.38 inches, and locked this in with on the splice area with a C-clamp. Bingo! The holes in Scotty's piece lined up precisely with the holes in the X member. I knew at this point that Scott's parts weren't going to work. I was ready to tack weld this first piece into place, but I needed to keep the part free to use it for a pattern to fab the outer piece with some keel. After cleanup of the rust, the tail removal, I set to working on preparing the front end of the new IFS crossmember, independent front suspension crossmember. I fabbed up a temporary cross support out of 1-inch diameter, 1/8 inch thick pipe that was from a handle of a floor jack. I butt welded some hex nuts the same size as what the bumper brackets use and placed this at the very front of the frame. With the front of the frame secure, I then set the removal of the original cross member. I used a sidewinder with a grinding wheel on it to remove the rivet heads, and used a center punch to either punch the rivet through on a couple of cases or mark the center so that they could be drilled out. A drip pin finished off the harder to remove rivets, and the sledgehammer was employed to slide the old cross member back from the sandwich of the metal created by the frame and the radiator mounts, which were carefully left in place by some other rivets that they have in the outer frame rails. The steering column bracket was removed with this in the same process. All in all, it was a very productive few hours spent on the frame. Things went pretty well considering I had band jobs and other family-oriented activities to tend to beside cutting grass at the shop, at home, and at home. There was a fair amount of metal from the refuse from this weekend, and the frame is about ready to start with refabrication once I am able to get a MIG welder and some metal and that cross member from Eddie Jones. I'm also looking forward to getting those components from Bob Schmidt so I can start mocking up what the new drivetrain will do to the old X-braces. Framework, day 2. This log was made on May 15th of 2005. For the first 2 weeks I had things keep me away from the project. This week Chris is out of town on business, so I will not be able to get to much work. I did get the plate steel I needed to fab the rear part of the frame. Here are some pictures of the layout before we got to Feist to cut it all out. Connection of the X-frame tails that Scotty gave me to the frame. A picture of Danny measuring the overall length. We got a current picture of him too, so that's how long this project has been going on. The 157 3/8 or 0.38 inches of the tape to cut the pieces temporarily clamped back onto the back frame. Thanks again to Feist for the use of his plasma cutter. Now I need to get one of those for me. Man, those things are nice. Can't wait to get to welding now, but that won't be until Mama gets back into town. Well, Mommy, Chris, made it back into town and we celebrated our 6th anniversary this weekend. She's still putting up with me, folks. What a wonderful lady. On Saturday, I got 2 pieces we cut at Feist's with his plasma cutter attached to the old frame. I was tickled at how the new welding helmet worked. I was able to get behind some of the old frame pieces to weld about a foot back into the old frame with some overlap left on the new piece to try to make a stronger attachment. Scott's X-frame members worked out great on Sunday. I got the top 2-inch straps attached. These worked out great in that I was able to leave about 18 inches back onto the old frame member on these guys as well. I have the bottom straps to complete the rear channel section. I'm a little concerned that I found the rear is about 3/4 of an inch too high. We'll check the measurement again to see if after I get the bottom straps on. Measuring the diagonal of the entire frame, we're within 1/4 inch on 161 inches overall. I'm satisfied with this level of control, and I have a couple of things I'm looking at to try to improve these deformities. And I am not overly confident or concerned until I get the rear cross piece and X member installed. All in all, the connection is looking stronger than what was originally manufactured. Framework Day 4, May 23rd, 2005. I picked up some more welding rod, a 3" by 3" tube of steel for the rear cross member, and a 1" by 2" channel for the rear bar of the frame. Man, steel is out of sight. I told you I was a cheap guy. Anyway, after I got the little guy down for the night and the rest of my daddy chores, I made it down to the shop and got one of the bottom 2" strap metal pieces fabbed and tack welded into place. That was pretty much it for this day. Framework Day number 5. This was logged in on May 24th of 2005. I got the other bottom 2" strap metal piece fabbed and tack welded into place. At this point, I'm noticing some warping in the steel. I hope I can pull this out with a cross member and a rear channel. These pieces, if cut properly, along with some bar clamps, might be able to pull things into shape. The top humps are pulled in about 3/4 of an inch. The passenger sides looks pretty straight, and when I sight down the side, but the driver's side looks like it leans in a bit. I might have to pull things around with some come-alongs on the diagonals, but we are going to take our time on this issue before I start full welding beads on the outside of the newly formed channels that comprise the rear part of the frame. One positive note is I think my welder skills are improving. I'm getting a lot of practice and the penetration looks good. I am watching the puddle form behind the arc. Strike-ups are no longer providing a challenge. I'm using the thicker metal to flow into thinner pieces of metal to keep the hotter arc temperature from burning through the thin stuff. All in all, I feel I'm making progress in my technique. Much of this should apply to the MIG when I get that to work on with the thinner stuff like the sheet metal. Framework Day 6. Log is May 30th of 2005. I got to the truck after cutting the grass and some other small honeydews on the Memorial Day afternoon. I got the rear part of the frame wrapped into shape with some bar clamps, a spreader piece where the rear cross member will eventually go, and a cable come along with some chain across one of the entire diagonals of the frame. Control-wise, I'm relatively happy with what we got on this work. I nailed the overall diagonals to 161 each, and the height difference was that I was worried about over the rear humps was corrected. I am now at 5 inches height difference, which is what the old 36 measures setting on the ground. After the measurements came in right with all of the rigging, I set the welding, got the rear members all welded solid. The welds don't look great, but there is good penetration. After I ground down the passenger side, things were looking pretty decent. There was so much grinding that I needed to get more grinding wheels for the Sidewinder. That was good as Chris and Danny stopped by the shop and said, "Homemade pizza on the back porch in a half hour." I thought, uh-oh, time to clean up, let's go. Bob Schmidt got me the tranny and rear end. I am elated as Bob set me up with the entire frame and suspension out of a Chevelle, and it all looks like it will work. The vertical throw in the frame matches up with the width of the frame and matches up with what he gave me for the springs, a set of shocks, and a 4-bar to mock things up. All this is huge. If this all works out, Schmidt will be a major hero on this project. I was expecting just the tranny and rear end, but now it looks like I'll be able to put this project on the floor with some wheels once I get a couple of spindles and rotors for the front Mustang 2 independent front suspension. Framework Day 8. This log came in on June the 1st of 2005. This evening we were able to get the welds from the weekend cleaned up and start on some measurements to line up the new rear suspension. Framework, Day 9. This log came in on July 17th of 2005. I welded the rear crossmember in solid. I got the front mounts for the lower bars boxed in and welded solid to the X-frame. I welded the extensions to the lower bars in solid and rounded off some of the edges from the original pieces where the cut was made on them. I am at the point now where I need to fabricate a couple of cross members, one for the rear and another one for the transmission mount. Rework the transmission area of the X-frame and we should be ready to clean up the frame and apply paint to it. Framework, Day 10. This log came in on July 19th of 2005. I cut some pieces out of some old snowplows from work into a configuration I worked up in discussions with my brother Bob, who was in last week from Corpus Christi, Texas. I called Feist and I am scheduled to meet up with him on Saturday to use his plasma cutter to cut out some holes in the outer pieces before I weld them into the frame. Well, checking some dimensions on the frame, I noticed serious distortion on the passenger side outer rail of the frame. It is about an inch lower than the driver's side between the front and the back points on the jack stands that are mocking the frame up to the ride height. I am contemplating placing weight on the driver's side and applying pressure via a jack on the passenger side. I need to fix this before welding this new crossmember over to it. Feist had an idea of applying both long bolts with some straight material to comprise a sandwiching jig to straighten it. This is a great idea, but I don't think I have such material. We'll see what the weight and the jack idea accomplishes, then pursue some metal fabbing types to see if they have something like the frame sandwich that will work here. Framework, Day 11. This log came in on July 24th of 2005. I fixed a tire that I need to put the chassis onto the ground after I get the framework done. Thanks again to Bob Schmidt, who gave me 2 old wheels to put together a complete set of tires to continue to work on the truck after I get it set up with the new suspensions. I got by Feist's house on Saturday morning and cut those 2 access holes in the 1/2-inch plate I was using for the rear mid crossmember. I fixed some of the deformation in the frame by cantilevering 2 1/2-inch thick snowplow blades over the X-frame pieces toward the driver's side of the frame. I got things to within a 1/2 inch of the height of the driver's side, so I welded the crossmember into place. I also tied in the front connection points for the lower bars of the rear end, and everything is very solid back there now. Now the widening of the X-frame members to accommodate the modern drivetrain. Fabricate a bolt-on crossmember for the transmission, and we should be ready to prime and paint the frame after the motor and tranny have been set up with proper mounts. Framework, Day 12. Logged August 21st, 2005. I dabbled with the center section of the frame today. Before I knew it, the day was over, but I made great progress pulling out the old tranny connection and reworking the frame material in this area to accommodate a 350 turbo tranny. I also used the MIG welder here, and I liked the way it worked. Framework, Day 13. Logged August 26th, 2005. I'll be putting together a separate video for the drivetrain, but I'm close to putting together the mounts for the motor and transmission. I went through a 283 that I pulled out of my 57 Chevy. I investigated the number on the motor and found out that it was out of a late 61 Chevy car or Corvette. That eliminates my worry about putting it back into the 57. If it was an original block for that car, I would have cleaned it up, put it back together and stored for placement back into the 57. Since I don't have to worry about that, I will use it for mock-up in this truck, but with all that I lack putting together a working motor, I'm thinking it might make economic sense to get a new complete motor and put it in this truck. I bolted on the tranny that I got from Schmitty and hung it close to where it will go back in the truck. Looks like I'll be able to get everything to fit with the current frame configuration. Framework, Day 14, logged September 6th, 2005. I gave the center frame section another closer look and I decided that I wanted more room. I was not entirely happy with how the frame pieces connected back together and weren't totally straight in the tranny area. I stopped by Feist's house and cut some more of the 1/8-inch plate that I had left from the rear frame side pieces cut out back in May. When I got back to the shop, I was tired and about to head home when I realized it was early, about 8:30 p.m., and I could get another hour of fab work in. I hope to get the old sections cut out, but I was able to get that done, fit the new pieces, clamp them into place, and fairly well weld them up. I got most of the welds associated with the vertical web of the new channel into place on both sides. After that, I cleaned up the work area to take a couple of pictures. At this point, I realized I didn't have much of the old original frame left. There's only about 2/3 of the outer rails and only the stubs from the X-frame components left from the original frame. There are about 2 new cross members, a new rear rail. The back third of the frame was built from scratch material. The front of the front cross member attachment has 18 inches of 1/2-inch plate reinforcement. There is new mid cross member where the lower bars and rear end attached to the frame. There will soon be a bolt-on cross member for the rear mount of the transmission, and now the center of the X frame is coming together. Framework, day 15. This log came in on September 18th of 2005. I buttoned up the center section metal that I cut at Feiss's a couple of weeks ago. I am noting more improvement with my abilities on the MIG welder. The new center section is plenty strong and will afford ample room for the new drivetrain. I also got the drive shaft hump placed into the rear mid cross member. I was happy with how this turned out. I am lacking the front suspension strut connection points to make the frame and the engine and the tranny mounts from having the frame ready to clean up and paint. Framework, day 16. This is logged September 25th of 2005. Today was time to try to mount the motor and tranny to the frame. I got the motor and tranny positioned as close to what I thought was right as possible. I offset the motor 13/16 to the passenger side of center. I got 4 degrees of incline to match what I had on the rear end. I mocked up the set of 2 front motor mounts. I then drilled and set into place the tranny cross member. When I was done and relieved the pressure from the lift to allow the motor to rest in the frame, I was within a degree of level on the lateral axis and still right on with the 4 degrees of motor rake. I'm going to try to get Feiss to come over with his plasma cutter to see if he likes the setup. While he is there, I will cut the holes to bolt the tranny cross member. I am slightly concerned that the motor might be offset too much. While my other 36 was offset about 1 inch, I double checked in the rear end and it was more like about 1/2 inch to the passenger side than 1 inch that I thought it was. The drive shaft alignment shows this, but it looks like I have a ton of room for steering components and shifter. Again, we'll see what Feiss thinks before I nail the mounts into place. Framework, day number 17, 10/9 of 2005. Feiss made it over and he said he'd never heard of Chevy drivetrains being offset. I reread the comment in the Hot Rodder's Handbook, and it says that engines can be offset up to 1/2 inch. This infers to me that the preferred location is center, and other considerations, i.e. steering, should come after engine placement. I checked with Scott, and he says it shouldn't be a problem. I checked with Schmitty. He says that stock cars are offset by 2 inches to the driver's side of his cars to shift weight toward the center of the track. Ed Albeets says that the center is preferred, but that some offset is not a problem. With all this input, I set the motor to 1/16 of an inch to the passenger side. I got the mounts reset and welded them into solid. I then set the cab on temporarily, and the 5 degrees of engine rake is causing some firewall issues for the distributor. I will look into shimming this up on the crossbar later to more like 3 degrees to see how this issue can be alleviated. I took all the parts of the frame, turned it over, and worked on some bottom welds I needed to make. I hope to make contact with either Feiss or Scott soon to get access to a plasma cutter to blow holes out in the tranny cross member. All right, we're getting close. Here's framework day number 18th, logged on October 15th of 2005. Scott came through with allowing me to use his plasma cutter. I made him a drag foot out of a piece of pipe. This allowed me to get the holes cut in the transmission cross member. I also got the brackets made for the front suspension. I heated and bent the sway bars to fit the configuration of my frame and mounted them. This is my last entry for framework. This is framework day 19, recorded on November 19th of 2005. Danny came along with me and we painted the frame of the truck after we got our landscaping work done. Dan is a real trooper and made sure I got everything done just right. He's so much like his mother, and that's a good thing.